This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
More than half of working Americans still aren't comfortable necessarily sharing their caregiving responsibilities at work. And I would certainly have put myself in that category 10 years ago.
Caring for aging parents or other loved ones while working, raising children, and trying to live your own life? Wondering how to find the time for your personal health and happiness? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast, the show where real family caregivers share how to be happy and healthy while caring for others. Now, here's your host, family caregiver and certified caregiving consultant, Elizabeth Miller.
Hi there. Thanks for tuning in to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast, which is part of the Whole Care Network. If this is your first time listening, I want to welcome you. I am so glad you're here. This is a show produced bi-weekly to help family caregivers integrate self-care and caregiving into their lives. We throw a lot of information at you, so don't worry about it. Just enjoy the listen. And know that you can check out all the resources and all the information on the accompanying show notes page. You can go to happyhealthycaregiver.com, go to the podcast menu, then click the image or the episode number for today's show. We're also going to make that link available to you in your podcast app platform's episode description. I've got two announcements to share with you today. One is I'm hoping that you're thinking about coming to cruise with us. We are excited about the Self-Care at Sea cruise that's happening in October of 2025. Myself and other carepreneurs, co-hosts have come together to try to strike a great deal so that caregivers can get the respite that they need, or anyone that's seeking self-care. This is for all cruisers and anybody who's interested. And we want to give you, a great deal. We want to give you the resources. We want to give you the opportunity to connect with other caregivers on the cruise and then leave with new friends in the caregiving space. Learn more about this wonderful opportunity at bit.ly/HHC Self-Care Cruise. This topic is very relevant for our podcast today. I'm wondering if your company has an employee resource group and is looking for support and resources for your ERG. That is something that I definitely do. I provide one-time virtual or in-person webinars, educational webinars that weave in storytelling. I can also facilitate caregiving panels, lead monthly group coaching calls, and do a lot more to support the ERG in your organization. I'm excited that employers are starting to get that working family caregivers really need their support. If you think that this is something that your employer could really benefit from, perhaps send them my speaker demo reel. Will attach that in the show notes page. And I would love to just set up a call to have a brief conversation so that we can learn more about each other. I'd like to thank our episode sponsor, Rare Patient Voice. Do you want to earn cash in exchange for your opinion? Rare Patient Voice, or RPV, helps connect researchers with patients and family caregivers for over 700 diseases and conditions. For patients and caregivers, RPV provides the opportunity to voice their opinions to improve medical products and services while earning cash rewards. Rare Patient Voice, helping patients and caregivers share their voices. If you're interested, join the RPV panel at rarepatientvoice.com/Happy Healthy Caregiver. I finished a book recently called The Shoemaker's Wife by Adriana Trigiani. I've read other books by her and loved them, so was excited when my girlfriend picked this for our book club. Warning, you're going to be hungry for Italian food and culture when you read this book. It's an epic novel, and the audio warning also was pretty long because it spans decades and continents. As a caregiver, it'll allow you to escape your life and get wrapped up in someone else's life that is set in the early 20th century. It's a slow pace, but I think this may be what I needed, and maybe it's what you need. Some of the themes include immigration, poverty, family, loss, the opera, hard work, and locations from the Italian Alps to New York City and Minnesota. This was the first time I did a combo Kindle and audiobook to finish the book in time for our book club discussion. It was long, but I'm giving it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. The favorite thing I want to share with you is a sandal that is really super kind to my feet lately. It was recommended by somebody on my pickleball team because I've been having some issues with my feet, maybe like some Achilles tendonitis type of stuff, definitely some inflammation. She recommended this sandal called OOFOS. It's a lightweight recovery sandal that reduces the stress on the feet and the joints, and it's washable. OOFOS claims that their sandals absorb over 35% of the impact of traditional foam shoes. I was so glad also that I had my OOFOS when I went on vacation and suddenly found that after going to the ER, they discovered I had a blood clot behind my knee, which was greatly impacting my walking ability. The OOFOS were the best things that I could have had on my feet at that time. I was limping. I was in a lot of pain. I am on a prescription medication, and looking as the time of this recording, I don't know necessarily the cause of the blood clot, but all in all, really grateful that I'm kind of over the hump, at least of the pain part right now, and that I had my OOFOS, frankly, that helped me on this journey. It's been my preferred shoe to been walking in when I've had these pickleball issues and also with that health scare issue that I had. Let's meet today's caregiver in the spotlight. Jean Lanzoni's life centers around caregiving, both at home and at work. As an only child, Jean and his wife for over 30 years, Elizabeth, took on the responsibility of caring for his aging parents. Professionally, Jean leads the development of thought leadership research and produces content on caregiver trends. He's also a co-lead and founding member of a caregiver-focused employee resource group, or ERG. In this episode of the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast, we're going to discuss the origins of their ERG and the numerous benefits it offers to both employers and employees. And we explore how Jean's spiritual self-care practices and his love of coffee have helped him navigate the challenges of caregiving. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hi, Jean. Welcome to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast.
Hi, Elizabeth. Great to be here.
I am excited about our conversation, and we're going to get into it. But first, I'd like to get your thoughts on something that we're going to pull out from the Happy Healthy Caregiver jar here. And this PDF is available if people want to make their own jar. But love to get your thoughts on this. It says, it's nice and short and sweet, Jean. It says, storms don't last forever.
Love that.
Storms don't last forever. How do you think that pertains to caregiving?
Well, I think it's the right attitude. It's an attitude of hope, right? So remaining positive and remembering why you're doing what you're doing as a caregiver, right? That for most people, the motivation is it's an act of love. And so, yes, I think that it's important to remember that, all of those trials and tribulations and difficulties along the way will end. What you'll remember is all the love and care that you gave and the time that you spent with that person that will be so long lasting and so meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I think that's true. We're hitting, the 10-year anniversary of my dad's death is approaching. And it's kind of like almost like having a kid. You only remember the good parts of the pregnancy and all of that.
That's right.
But those stick with you. You remember it was hard, I think, and you remember some of the struggles at a level, but that's not what kind of shines through, I think is I would agree with that. You have it interesting, and I purposely didn't mention this before because I was curious. Like, I know people listening to this who know me are going to recognize a last name of Lanzoni, because I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I'm one of 6 kids, and my mom, not my birth dad, but my mom's first husband, so my older 4 siblings, his name was Basil Lanzoni.
Oh, wow.
So small world. So I don't know if you have any relatives in Brockway, Pennsylvania.
We do.
You
I've
do.
actually, and I actually took a trip there. So this is a story about kind of holding on to those happy times and remembering all the good. So my wife and I took my parents out to Brockway, PA, to see where my father was born. And it was a very small little town, which is not even on the map. You can't find this. It's called Tickleback.
I have not even heard of that. And I love the
I'll bet you
first,
haven't.
no, Tickleback.
But we
Interesting
found
story.
it. We found it, and as we were driving down the street, and this was some 25 years ago, he actually recognized a relative walking down the street. So we actually had a chance to stop, and they had a conversation. But yeah, that was amazing. And yes, we do have Lanzoni's in Brockway, Pennsylvania. So how about that? Small
Interesting.
world.
Yeah, Basil Paul. I don't, his dad's name was maybe Francis. I don't know.
That's my
Um,
father's middle name.
yeah, and exactly. Basil Anthony, Paul was his brother. Their family lived right off of the park there, and we still
How
have some
about that?
cousins. So yeah, small world of
Small world.
Lanzonis. I'm sure I'll have to tell my siblings that we definitely connected and have some roots that tie up there together. What was your dad's name, by the way, in case they kind of know the family tree?
I'm junior, so he was Eugene Francis Sr., and I'm
Okay,
Eugene Francis Jr., and my
got it.
son is the third.
Wow, very cool.
And I told my son, you can end it there.
Well, I know you all are
Eugene
eating well.
Francis
I'm
the
going to
third.
say that, like with all the good Italian food that came into my life came from that part of the family. So,
Yep.
so cool. Well, you're also, Jean, I think I'm going to call you, and this isn't a bad thing, but it's a serial caregiver, a serial family caregiver, like meaning that you just like, it just keeps finding you, right? Tell us a little
Yes.
bit about your caregiving story and your experience. And it's really
Yeah.
quite deep.
Yeah. And it keeps going,
It
as you
keeps
say.
going.
Yeah. So I'm an only child, which is important because I think, in doing a lot of work with caregivers over the last few years, I know that having siblings can be a blessing and also can be a challenge when it comes to dividing up the caregiving duties, right? So I knew from obviously very early on that when it came to caring for my parents, it was going to be me.
Mm,
So I'm an only child. My wife, Elizabeth, is a saint. And so I call her Saint Elizabeth. She
nice.
has been incredible in terms of just supporting uh, me and all that I needed to do for my parents, knowing that I was an only child. But I would say caregiving, and this is something that I hope that we would get to talk about, but in the work that I'm doing at Guardian, which maybe we'll talk more about later, as a co-lead of our caregiving ERG, one of the things that we've really focused on is trying to help the organization and our colleagues understand that caregiving is not just about caring for the elderly, but
Right.
there is that misperception internally when we launched it that, oh, that's if you're caring for elderly parents or sick parents or maybe children with special needs, but it's not really for just parents of young children who are
Mm,
caregivers too. And so we've been spending a good part of the last couple of years trying to educate the organization that no, there's a lot of great benefits and resources and policies that Guardian has put in place. And a lot of the conversations we're having with the Care ERG can be beneficial to parents as well
I
of
think
young
so.
children.
I mean, a lot of the speaking that I do for ERGs is really, it's sometimes there are parents and caregivers ERG, they kind of call it out specific, put it together, but call it out specifically to kind of
That's
avoid
right.
that confusion. And I think that there's some misconceptions about caregivers too when it comes to we think automatically of physical care, but there's a lot of
Right.
mental health care that also
It's huge.
goes on. Yes, and sometimes those invisible things are harder to identify even as
Right.
a family caregiver. Um,
Well,
yeah,
I
think
mentioned that. I mentioned that about including parents of young children as caregivers because that's where my caregiving journey began.
okay.
Right. So we had three children. We had three children within the first 5 years of marriage. And I know lots of people today on my team and elsewhere in Guardian who in the same situation, right? With children very quickly. And that can be challenging. That can be
Yeah.
overwhelming. And there's some statistics recently in a report that we're about to release at Guardian called Mind Body Wallet that talks about the 215% increase that we've seen in disability claims that are related to uh, uh, post maternity stress.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
I think that's just, yeah, that's just something that we're seeing increasing really dramatically over the last few years.
Mm.
And it just means that, this is a joyful moment. This is a wonderful life event, but it can be complex
Yeah, it doesn't
and
mean
it
it's
can
not
be
heavy.
overwhelming,
Yeah.
right, for many. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And so there are resources, there are things that employers are doing to help ease that transition for new moms and new dads as well.
Yeah.
But back when I became a parent, that was not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that era, my which was a long time ago, you were just supposed to kind of tough it out. Like, what? If you need a manual for how to be a parent, maybe you shouldn't be a parent. That was kind of the attitude. Like, you just need to toughen up. So there really wasn't a lot of support back then. So I mentioned that because today there's definitely more support. And so colleagues who need that, I think there's more available today.
I like
And
it.
I think since the pandemic, I think that's been kind of a tipping point in terms of workplace policies around paid leave, around
Yep.
parental bonding leave. So that's all been helpful, and I think it's there, and colleagues should take advantage of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's where my caregiving journey began, caring for 3 young children. But while they were still very young, at the ages of 8 and 6 and 5, my wife was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I was not only caring then for 3 children, but also was caring for my wife during a year of chemo and radiation.
Mm.
Unfortunately, within the Lanzoni family, cancer was present. In particular, I lost an aunt in her 30s to breast cancer. And I know that the impact that had on their family and my cousins. So she was a mother of 3. Losing her at that young of an age. So that was all going through my mind as my 37-year-old wife was going through chemo, and with our young children, trying to kind of shield them from a lot of that and what was really going on. Fortunately, they were young enough that wasn't that difficult to do. But they saw, and they could see that she was obviously suffering. So that was difficult, but that was, another
What kind of
caregiving
support did you
experience.
get during that time? Like for you?
As most people talk about, the support was the outpouring of support was incredible. So many people just coming out of the woodwork. You would expect family, but people that we didn't even know, from the children's school, from church, everywhere, all walks. I mean, everybody was just so helpful, so supportive, anything they could do. So we
Do you
felt
think
very
it's
blessed.
unique to that diagnosis in particular, that outpouring of support? Because that doesn't necessarily happen with a lot of,
No?
like, oh, I'm caring for someone with COPD or someone,
Maybe.
different diseases, a stroke, or I don't know. Hopefully not. Like, hopefully it doesn't matter. It's, if you're well connected in their community, they're going to show up for you.
I think so. But, maybe it does have something to do with young mom with 3 young children.
Yes.
And there's probably, people feeling even more empathy from the school, especially, right? So other moms, where they knew her, they knew our family, they knew our kids really well. So they probably wanted to try and do a little bit more. Yeah. So that was kind of, my second
And she's in
experience with
remission,
caregiving.
or she's
Yeah. So
good.
yes, probably should cut to the end of the story now.
Well,
right?
they just want to leave people hanging. They're like, what happened?
Yes,
to her?
exactly. No, exactly. Yeah. So that was in
Oh,
1999. So yeah, she's 25 years.
amazing.
Yeah. 25 years this year. So then within about 5 years of my wife being in remission, we have parents, and her parents were in their 70s. Mine were in their 80s at that point, in the early 2000s. And we knew they were going to need care. Her parents had health issues already in their late 60s, early 70s. And my parents were getting older. And so we bought a house that our long-term care policy was buying a house that had an in-law suite. So we just knew we were going to all be living together at
You
some
were a solo
point.
caregiver, an only child. So you kind
Only
of
child. So that's what we chose to do. And we used it. So over a 9-year period, we had at least one parent living with us for a 9-year period. Yeah. And, that was, as we kind of said at the outset, wonderful in so many ways, but obviously also draining in many ways. But we talk about it to this day. My wife and I wouldn't do it any other way.
I was going to
No,
ask
no,
you.
absolutely. Oh, zero regrets.
And were
I mean,
your
just,
kids helping? They're obviously seeing you hands-on care. They had some roles.
probably the greatest benefit is exactly that, just what they saw, what they
Mm-hmm.
witnessed, and being part of, my parents and her parents' lives right to the end, as opposed to, needing to visit that. And you know what? I mean, and it works differently for everybody. And, not everyone is in a position to do it. Not everyone can do it, maybe financially or otherwise. It works better if you can, use a facility. But for us, we felt really blessed that we could afford to do it, that we had the ability to do it, and that our kids were able to be a part of that. Yeah. So my parents and her parents were in their lives to the very end.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of options out there for people. So I like to kind of spotlight the different options that caregivers have.
Yes.
And depending on your situation, some things work better than others. It's nice to hear you wouldn't do it differently. I think that, we want to live without regrets. And I know that it wasn't easy. Like we're kind of given the Cliff Notes version of it.
No.
But it's, there are some tough peaks and valleys of these years together,
Oh, yeah.
9 years, particularly when you had a multi-generational home. Like what got you through some of the tough times, Gene?
Yeah. I mean, I can remember, there's like two instances as you were just talking that like still come to mind. One is, I remember there was some issues at work, some management shakeup, and I was feeling a little bit uneasy about, the situation at work. And I came home one night, and the kids were, there was some issues with the kids, and my mother started to have dementia toward the end.
Mm.
And I just remember walking into the house, and it was just like chaos. And I was just like wiped out and I commuted, an hour and a half each way to work.
Wow.
So it was a very long day, as most of them were back then. And just walking into that, and I remember being in I would lay down with my mom at night to help when she would go to sleep, and we'd pray together. And I remember her saying something about the commode needed to be empty.
Oh no.
So I was like, I had just
You had a
laid down,
very
I just
serious
put my head
moment.
down. We
Yeah.
just start, yeah, and it was like, and I just that moment for some reason, and I've repeated that about the emptying of the commode being like this.
You're like, that's a buzzkill of your end of
Yeah,
the
it's a
day.
big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. So there's that. I think memories though of like birthdays and things celebrating all together when we're all. I mean, they were crazy times, but they were great times. Just the fact that we could share all of those moments together. They were just there when my kids were helpful. And you asked about that, I should give them more credit. So yes, they did. They stepped up quite often to help in any way that they could.
Do you have any tips for someone who's maybe thinking about this multi-generational home idea? Like anything that you'd want them to know before they kind of go in on this?
As I said, I think it depends on the situation. Given that we had the room and the space, I think that made a huge difference, right? So by the time my mom passed, she was the last to pass. I had two teenagers and one who was like 10 or so. And I think the fact that we had so much room and space in the house, I think the kids felt like they could still like live their life and we still could have friends over. It wasn't like that the whole house was devoted to, caring for my parents. So I think that's one of the reasons why it was doable and didn't disrupt, the family life too much. But, I do think every situation is different. So you have to kind of do what works for you. And, again, sibling support is kind of key, and that plays a role in whether you make a decision to, do it in your home or provide care elsewhere. I think that's also important. So for me, having my wife who was playing this huge role, right? I couldn't have done it. I could not have done this
right
alone.
And
so
thankfully, shared health was back, in a good spot. Can you imagine? No, Gene, you talk about, you've obviously had much experience as a a man who's working, corporate environment, while you're caregiving, like what are some of the things, pre now, like back then, that were helpful to you at work, or is that how we got to this point of needing things like ERGs?
That's how we got to this point. Yeah. So it was not, here's a story that I do tell, which really speaks to how far we've come, even in the last 10 years. So, my mother passed away 11 years ago. And, when she passed away, she had an episode in our house. I had just finished up working on a project that was like a 6 to 9 month project, working with this large cross-functional team. And we were reporting out the findings to senior leadership this particular day.
Of course, it's all coming together.
Of course. And so I was right in the middle of presenting when I got a phone call that my mother, was brought to the hospital and they weren't sure if she was going to make it through the night.
Oh my.
So at that point, I could either just walk out of the room, and somebody had literally had to come up to me while I was in the front of this room with all of these senior executives there and tap me on the shoulder and just call me over to the side and tell me this. And then I had to make a decision. And at the time, I'm looking out at my boss and my boss's boss and thinking this would not go over well if I were to leave the room right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished the presentation, and I did make it back to the hospital before my mom passed. But I tell that story because today, I think, the culture at Guardian, as well as many other companies, hopefully, is very different. That there would be a lot more empathy and understanding in that situation. And I think that's evidence in the benefits and the policies that have changed, and also and the resources that are made available. And then also, as you talked about, employee resource groups that are there for people to be able to share. So there's a lot of data, and we have a report on caregiving trends in America. And we talk about the fact that more than half of working Americans still aren't comfortable necessarily sharing their caregiving responsibilities at work. And I would certainly have put myself in that category 10 years ago. So my boss had no idea. And in fairness to them, so I'm taking responsibility for this too. I wasn't comfortable sharing it. Part of that's on me. Part of that's on me.
Well, you were worried about the stigma as and everybody's company's at a different level even now. So, would you be passed up for opportunities? Maybe they're making assumptions that Jean can't handle this, and that's affecting your the choices that you have and to put it in front of you. So I think, we have, hopefully in a lot of ways, we've come a long way. But for those that are listening, that have never heard of an employee resource group, just maybe share a little bit about what is that?
Yeah, so it's essentially forming communities, right, within your workforce. So people who have similar challenges, similar interests, similar needs, providing them with safe space to share, to talk about those experiences, to learn from each other in ways that just weren't necessarily available before. And we have 9 of them at Guardian. We have 9 employee resource groups dedicated to colleagues who have disabilities, to colleagues who identify as LGBTQ, colleagues who are Asian American, colleagues who are Hispanic, all of these different groups where they can, just share and learn from each other, and also provide feedback to Guardian leadership about what their needs are and what would be beneficial from an HR, from a policy, from a benefits perspective. There's also a term called business resource groups, which also take a lot of this internal feedback and sharing of information about the needs of these different communities, and then actually turn that into business opportunities, thinking about, well, if there are, for example, Guardian providing insurance and financial services products, if there are specific products that could be of benefit to this segment of the workforce, because we know it's helpful to our own colleagues, maybe this is something we should think about offering
for the public, or how to market it a certain way.
Right.
So
so we're learning from learning from the ERGs to benefit the organization from a cultural perspective, the health and productivity of the workforce, but also in terms of thinking about even business implications.
And were you there at the start for the care? You called yours care, I think.
Yes, I was one of the 3 founding members of the CARE ERG.
Was it one of the first ERGs, or like, did you
It
have
was
a
the
formula?
last. That was
Oh,
the
okay.
ninth.
So
Yeah.
was there like a formula that you had to follow? Like if someone's thinking, hey, I really want to try to start a care focused ERG where I work, like what are the steps that you took?
I think there was enough going on in the market. Our senior leadership actually asked me, so we didn't have to propose it. I was actually tapped.
Okay, you didn't have
So
to sell it,
yeah,
which is
so
good.
no, I didn't have to sell it at all. No, we had done some research on it and published some research on the caregiving trends in like 2019. And so I think there was some thought about, hey, maybe one of our ERGs should be devoted to caregivers. And so not long after that, they asked me if I would be interested, and two other colleagues of mine. And so, we've been 2 years this August.
Okay. And
Yeah,
typically it's an unpaid role, like, right?
absolutely.
You're doing it on top of your day job.
Yeah. Yes.
That's what my experience. And then what's
Just like
working?
caregiving itself, it's a labor of
Yeah,
love.
just like, hey, yeah, you're voluntold but you care about it enough that you want to see
Oh,
the
yeah.
change and you want to see the culture change. And so that you're
Oh, yeah.
the right person for the role. What would you say, like what's working well at your ERG, and maybe, what's not working
Yeah.
well, but what are some of the things that you all do for your members, your community
Yep.
members?
So I'll talk about things we do, and I'll also talk about things that we've learned, which were really beneficial. So in terms of what we do, as an ERG, one of the very first things you want to do is poll the organization to find out, well, how many caregivers do we have? Because most organizations have no idea.
Yeah.
Most
Well, and people
organizations
don't
have no idea
self-identify, so it's
because
almost
they're
like
not
you can't even
right,
really say how many caregivers, like how many people are doing this, that. Yeah.
right. So we created a survey, which helped us to collect a lot of information about a few thousand colleagues who responded and told us whether they're a caregiver, who they're providing care for, how long they've been doing it, what they identify as some of the key challenges for them,
Okay.
what topics are of greatest interest to them. If we were to be hosting events or providing them with content, what would be of greatest interest? So that really helped us to kind of build our year one plan, right? Our year one strategy for what we would do from a programming perspective, how we would communicate, who we would be targeting within the organization. So today we have over 1,100 active members of the
Wow.
ERG. Yeah. And that's, little over 10% of the total Guardian population. So there's still a long way to go. Like there's a lot of opportunity yet. And that's because, again, I think there's still a lot of awareness raising to do about the care ERG being for more than just those caring for the elderly. So I think we still have a ways to go. We talk to people all the time, say, oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, somebody told me they were on this webinar you guys did, and it was about parents of young children, and we didn't realize. So I think that, there's still a long way to go in terms of just ramping up awareness. But so we provide a lot of content. So we have a monthly webinar or coffee chat.
Love
So
it.
if it's coffee chat, it's just colleagues sharing stories. If it's a webinar, we usually bring in an outside speaker who has some expertise on a topic, like geriatric care managers. We brought in people from one of our behavioral health programs to talk about mental health and maintaining mental health as a caregiver. We talk to some of the caregiver resources that we have, like concierge services, like a Wealthy, and had them come in and talk about what they do to support working caregivers.
Nice.
Talk about, those kinds of benefits, right? So that's one of the major things that I think the ERG has contributed to the organization, is raising awareness about our benefits, about our policies, about what Guardian is actually doing to make life a little bit easier for our working caregivers. And again, many of them were just unaware of these things.
I mean, I can tell you, I wasn't aware where I worked, like of what I could have used, until much later. So it's good that, there wasn't an ERG for that, and there wasn't some of those things, but I'm glad that you've got, different types of things. You've got educational webinars and content, and like fast tracking them to resources, knowing that they're not alone. And then the coffee chat to kind of just get things, air things out. And caregivers have the best ideas. Yeah.
But beyond that, I think number one, though, I started with the programming, but what that led to is people meeting each other. So when I said in the
Yes.
beginning, it's about community, right? It's about building community and it's about strengthening the culture. And that's what's been happening, which is more exciting than anything, is having people come up to me and say, Gene, I've never had a conversation before with a colleague about what I'm doing with my husband who is struggling with early dementia.
Right.
And I've met now 5 other colleagues who are going through the same thing, and I had no idea. And we're talking about it and we're sharing, and it's been really helpful.
Yes. Yeah,
Like
it's
for
the
me,
emotional
that's a huge
therapy.
win.
Yeah, and it's the practical things because I'm sure if they live in the same area, they could potentially connect to some resources that have been helpful for them. And all of that makes it very accessible too. Do you have like so you have the meetups, but do you also have a place to communicate in between meetings?
Yes. So yeah, we have basically our own like social media channel. So we use a platform known as Viva Engage now, formerly Yammer, but it's basically, a water cooler type of
Like a
digital,
Slack or Microsoft
like a
Teams.
Slack,
Yeah.
right? So people can share and post articles or post questions. Around the holidays, we did tips for how to enjoy the holidays if you're a caregiver, like easy recipes or tips for going on vacation when you have an elderly parent with young children. So that was, yeah, we got some really good
I'm really
suggestions. And
impressed
it was a
with
nice
the
exchange.
yeah, and with the engagement that you've built. Like some organizations, their heart is in the right place as far as their ERG, but they have a hard time because they're working their day job of putting some focused attention on it.
Yeah.
And that's why, like I have a package of support and services that I put together for Happy Healthy Caregiver to support ERGs with like leading a support group, doing webinars, helping them moderate panel discussions, giving them content ideas for their channels. But some companies are doing a great job on there, and some people need a little more help with that. And some people can maybe afford the big buck, platforms that can do all that. So working with people's different budgets, but I'm really impressed. In 2 years, I think you should be proud of the engagement and the community that you're building. I know you don't want the number of you felt like was not where you kind of thought it needed to be with your active members, but for somebody who works with ERGs, I think it's very
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah, I only say that because based on our research, we know that like 7 in 10 workers today meet that definition, this broader
Yes.
definition that we've been using in this conversation about who a caregiver is. We know that like 7 in 10 guardian colleagues probably have some kind of caregiving duties.
Yeah. Or
And
expecting
yet,
them to come. And wouldn't it be
yeah,
great to kind of get them before they're like hair's on fire,
yeah,
because I always share too that like the best day to find support and connection with other caregivers is on your best day. Like, why wait until you're in a crisis mode and then like, oh my gosh, what do I do next? It's like if you can kind of tip your toe in and kind of just learn a little bit through osmosis. Especially like in your situation, you knew it was coming. And I think a lot of us, we can kind of anticipate situations
right.
like that. I mean, in my family, my folks are deceased. And so we anticipated that when that happened, the siblings were going to have to cooperate to help with one of my brothers who has an intellectual and developmental disability. So you likely know, but again, that's very
Yeah,
different than caring for an older adult. So it's like you're in this whole new learning thing of needing support and resources. So every nuance is maybe a little bit different. But well done. Is there anything that like did you reference anything outside of your own ERGs at Guardian or do you reference anything today outside to kind of inform you and fill your bucket about what ERGs are doing and how you could choose
we
maybe add things to what you've already got?
yeah. So we do have an equity and inclusion committee that kind of
Okay.
oversees the running of all of the ERGs. And so
Okay.
they provide us with benchmarking data. We meet twice a year in person. And usually at those meetings, we just had one in April. They shared some benchmarking information about and ERG best practices. We had a guest speaker come in who consults
Amazing.
with a lot of those large, like Fortune 500 companies around their E&I programs and ERGs. And so she gave us some, great advice about how to continue to kind of move the needle forward with ERGs and how to continue to get, senior leadership support and budget and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Budget and all of that. Exactly. Cause it's like,
Mhm.
you want to get, the right folks that are helping you all. Amazing. Well, anything else you want to add on the ERG topic before we kind of switch to a self-care?
The only other thing about the ERG, and this is kind of where we're going, and we started to go there in the second year, but in our third year, which will begin in September, because this caregiving community is so large and diverse, we've talked about elder care, child care, children with special
Sandwich
needs,
generation, both.
sandwich
Yeah.
generation, right? And even when you say, spouse or partner care, right? Each one a little bit different, have little nuances, and probably have some of the different challenges and needs. We're really going to be breaking apart the ERG. It's not going to be one ERG, but we now have like subgroups focused on each of those different segments of the community to develop programming and content and foster community that's almost like a sub community within the larger caregiver community, just because we're recognizing that the needs of each of those groups and what they might be interested in terms of content might be very different.
Yeah. Like, there is this like umbrella of things that can help general caregivers as far as like your guardian benefits, maybe even like self-care type of mental health for caregivers overall. But then to your point, there are some nuanced things. Dementia caregiving needs like a whole other type of thing then.
Yes.
So yeah, depending upon your condition, I can totally see the need for that. Very cool. Well, I want to learn a little bit about your self-care, Jean. Like when you were in the throes of being the serial caregiver over the years, like how did you, my definition of self-care is like anything that energizes you, gives you peace of mind, or is just plain joyful. Like how did you check some of those boxes when you were raising kids, caring for older adults and your wife?
It probably nothing all that exciting, and
that's okay. That makes it more
fairly
attainable.
Common. But for me, I'm also a deacon in the Catholic Church, and so my faith is very important to me. So I would be kidding myself and anyone else if I didn't say it was my faith that really was the number one thing that got me through all of it. Especially when my wife had cancer. I look back on that, and people ask me like, well, they'll say, well, you must have really been having a rough time. That must have been horrible. And my recollection of it now is it wasn't. And I just feel like I was floating through it. And there was definitely a hand just guiding me through it. Like I wasn't doing it on my own. I couldn't have done it on my own. And I feel like I didn't. So there was some kind of divine support that I was getting. That's how I feel today. So there's the faith. And then secondly, my kids, being, I was working in New York and commuting an awful lot, but I didn't spend time doing much else other than work, caring for the kids, caring for my wife, and then ultimately with my parents, but family, so it's family, and they were central, and I spent as much time with my kids. And to this day, we just came back from a shore vacation, and I tell people my early 30s and late 20-year-olds still want a vacation with their parents every year. I think that's a testament to the amount of time that we've spent together as a family, and that we still kind of love being together. So I think my family, my kids, my faith kind of got me through it. I think those have been key.
I like, what it is it's not like some, mammoth thing that you got to go out and like do. These are little micro acts that you have infused in your years that, keep you still standing upright and smiling and sharing about it. So that's important. Very cool. And what does self-care look like for you now?
So now, so I said at the very beginning, right, that the care journey continues. So now I have 2 grandchildren.
Ooh.
And one on the way. And so it's not a full-time job yet. I'm still working, as you can see.
Yeah.
But we have 2 grandkids that my wife's watching them twice a week. And on those days, I try and work from home so that I at least be around a little bit, spend some time. So we're doing grandchildren caregiving now, which is different but awesome. I don't know That's the best way I can describe it. Raising kids was fantastic, but grandchildren, and that's not just because you can everybody says, yeah, you like that because you can just hand them off at the end of the day. No, it's not
Yeah.
that. It's
Well,
just that there's a different, I think you're at a different point in your life where you can just appreciate that time, and how much love and goodness they bring into your life, just like your kids did, but you were probably too busy, stressed about, raising a family and paying the
signing
mortgage
up for
and your
the,
job and
practice
your
and,
career. Yeah,
hmm
there's too much going on to really fully appreciate them. So now, like every little thing they do, we just, plenty of grandparents, they're showing off their pictures and the videos now. And
you get
so
it.
that's where we are.
Well, and you're not the first person that like, I think sometimes people will be like, oh, did you mention it under the self-care umbrella? Because I recently spoke to another guest who called spending time with her grandkids a non-negotiable because it really fed her soul, like filled it up with
Yeah.
joy. And it just, that
Yes.
it is energizing for her. It can
That's
sound
right.
like caring for kids can be exhausting, but
It is.
in short stints, like maybe what you're doing, and your wife is doing, like it can be energizing and give you kind of a new perspective on things.
Everybody's different, right? I was talking to one of my colleagues just this morning here, and they said they're having a hard time getting their parents to watch the kids at all. They don't
Yes.
get it. They're like, we thought they'd be like loving being great. So everybody's different.
I mean, my parents were not.
Their view is, hey, we've done this already.
Yes, my parents raised
Been
six
there, done that.
kids, and the grandkids came soon after, started coming, and they made it very clear that they were not the kind of grandparents that were going to keep the kids for.
Yeah. So,
they
to each his own, and everybody's
they each
different, and
their
everybody's
own.
been through enough, maybe of caregiving. But yeah, we love it. So that is, I think, self-care in its own way, is just spending time with them, being able to kind of replay some of what all the good times and what are great memories of raising our own kids.
Yeah, even like the favorite books you had as a kid, or the activities or you want to teach them. I can't tell you how many little people I've taught how to shuffle a deck of cards and make the little bridge. And, it's like, I remember an older person teaching me how to do that, or how to ride a bike, or like those kinds of things stick with you for sure.
I'm surprised that more people. So you're right about that. For me, that's a self-care thing. I think for my wife too, it's almost like reliving your youth a little bit.
Yeah.
When you spend time with your kids, you did too. I pulled out the old Hot Wheels set that I had and that brought back tremendous memories. Now we're playing wiffle ball with my son in the backyard. Like, oh, I used to do that, with my cousins and my dad, and we, brought back great memories. Well, now the same thing with my grandkids. So it's an opportunity to kind of, go back in time yet again, at a time where maybe it even means more. It means something different now when you're at this stage rather than when you're a parent.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sweet. Very sweet. Well, I've got a few questions to ask you from the Just for You Daily Self-Care Journal,
Okay.
Jean. So let's see what your thoughts are. This is, these were intended to be prompts to help people put more focus on their own health and happiness.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you'll have an answer for this one, but maybe share a boundary that you set, or maybe that you need to set, to create more me time for yourself, more alone time for yourself, or me time for yourself. Did you have to set a boundary, or kind of do anything, even with work-life balance? Was there anything there?
Yeah, I can't say that it was like a conscious thing, but I would say, and I didn't mention this before, I guess I've always tried to continue to do things that I enjoy, right? And I didn't have like a grand plan around it, and nothing set in stone, like I've got to do this X times a month or something. But, I enjoy going to baseball games, and I've had, tickets to see the Yankees for years and years. My uncle passed them down to me. And so I've continued to do that, and I take the kids. And so I would make sure that I would still do that, for many, many years. So the things that I enjoy.
That's good.
I try to keep doing,
I think it's a grand idea to have like some kind of repeat thing, whether it's like, theater tickets or something you enjoy. And it's like the date is happening, and it kind of forces the moments to happen, because sometimes I think you can look back and you're like, whoa, I haven't had a date with myself, or
That's true.
in a long time. So it can kind of, scheduling self-care is a master tip, I think, on that.
Yeah.
So in a way, the baseball schedule helped you do that.
Baseball schedule, and my wife likes going to the movies. She'll go to baseball games, but doesn't enjoy that as much as going to the movies. So we do that. We make sure we're
I love
going
the movies
fairly often. So yeah, those are things that that we do. But so I don't know if it was like setting a boundary per se or saying, but we definitely made it a point of continuing to try and do things, together, especially like going to dinner, going to a movie, and then things that I would do with my kids, just so that we weren't always in the throes of caregiving, when my parents were. Yeah.
It's important to have those moments. Any ideas or things that you're doing to slow down and enjoy life a little bit more?
Well, I would say, spending that time with the grandkids when I can, still working as of now, getting closer to retirement every day. And so, yeah, I think, as I get closer to retirement, I'm getting more and more excited about, being able to do some different things and having more time on my hands. And maybe doing some of the things that I've been doing like part-time, like, working with the caregiver community like you are, but maybe spending more time on that, spending more time with my ministry as a deacon as well. So, yeah.
It's a great opportunity, an entry point for many caregivers, through the healthcare system to kind of, be identified as either a caregiver. Here's some resources and support thing out of there. And then your role that you have in your faith community is also a great place to kind of share that with people and get that message out so that you can fast track them to support and resources. So you're kind of doing it in all the work.
I know. I'm tired. But.
Yeah. Well, and it can be true. Like there can be times where I think like if you're in a care role, like I've met many caregivers over the year that if they're a nurse or they're a social worker or, working with people who need a lot of hands-on care, and then they come home and have that too, like it can be very exhausting to constantly be on this care wheel all the time. You do have to kind of make time to re-energize. I didn't have that kind of job. I had a strategic and IT job for many years. So sometimes coming to work felt like respite in a weird way because I knew how to do the job. Maybe the challenges that came up, but it wasn't like the end of the world. And it just, where you're not dealing with a lot of emotions and opinions on family things. It's exhausting. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Last question for you is, what foods do you consume that make you feel energized?
Coffee.
Coffee. Yeah. Or what kind
I have to say,
do you make
coffee,
it at home?
coffee. So I love coffee, and I didn't start drinking it till I was working. So I was in my mid-20s, but I think I drink so much coffee that my son started to really enjoy, I think, the aroma of coffee when he was in high school. And by the time he was in college, he had bought himself a cappuccino, like an expensive cappuccino maker.
Yeah.
And so he has become like a coffee connoisseur, and there's almost a coffee snob. Like he can't drink a cup of coffee unless he's made it from premium beans and everything. So I'd say coffee is something that we now share. I
love
an
that.
Interest in and enjoy.
It can be a little like ritual self-care moment. I know it is for me in the morning. Like there are times where I'm like,
absolutely.
And it's like I can make it to the coffee bar and make myself a little, I use an espresso machine, but put some cinnamon in it, some vanilla, froth up my thing in my little Nespresso frother. And I feel like I'm treating myself almost to a Starbucks that way. Yeah. How do you like your coffee?
Anyway.
Yeah,
I am not a coffee. So I just like any coffee. As long as it's coffee, I enjoy it. I like flavored coffee, unflavored coffee, cappuccino, espresso, anything.
You're sounding like Bubba Gump right now.
Doesn't have to be Starbucks. It could be 7-Eleven or whatever the local fast food place is.
You're in the Northeast, so isn't it? Everything's Dunkin' Donuts. I feel like up there.
Dunkin' Donuts, lots of Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, for me, coffee, maybe, and pizza.
Pizza. I mean,
because we're in New Jersey, the pizza is fantastic. New York, New Jersey, pizza is fantastic. So yeah, that's another.
It has to do with the water, right? Sure. That's what they say. The water makes the better pizza and the better bagels.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I do. I wouldn't mind some of that right now. That sounds lovely. Well, is there anything, Jean, that you wish that we would have highlighted and talked about? Are there things that the public can get from the things that you're doing at Guardian that may be complementary to them? Anything else that you want to just kind of highlight before we sign off?
Some of the research that we've done address things that we've talked about today around caregiver challenges and needs and resources that are available through their employer. So if you don't have an ERG, first of all, I would probably make sure that you're asking the question, because there might be an ERG and you might not even be aware. So if you are working and you're a working caregiver, definitely find out if your organization has an employee resource group, and ask what kinds of services, what kinds of programming, what kinds of content, and maybe even opportunities to get involved if you're interested. So that would be one thing. We do produce a fair amount of research among caregivers. So you might find some content related to things that you're dealing with, challenges that you're facing, and some suggested resources and solutions within that. So I think maybe that it's on our website. Maybe that's something that you're going to make available to Elizabeth.
I'll put a link in the show notes to that, and I'll also put a link. I've written some posts about how to start your own employee resource group focused on caregivers, some of the steps there. I also wrote one on about how to build the engagement on that and grow your community. So I'll share a couple of those links too, in case people are just trying to suck in all the resources. And this gives you ideas of things that you can either get involved with or think about starting, because I think it really matters.
Yeah, that's the key takeaway. There's so much more information available. There's so many more resources than when I was going through my period of sandwich generation. So take advantage of all of those great resources, all the great HR policies and benefits that are making it easier to try and balance the caregiving with your work responsibilities.
Yeah. That's what I'm excited to kind of even see that even get developed more. I just thank you, Jean, for kind of bringing all of this to light and giving people, I think, hope that are working caregivers of some of the things that they can do so that they feel supported and connected and not so isolated in this journey. And thanks for just being vulnerable also and sharing your story and sharing your joys as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. It was a pleasure.
Do you enjoy listening to podcasts? So do I. And I'm always up to support a fellow carepreneur whose podcasts I value. Nicole Will, host of Navigating the World with Your Aging Loved One, explores the world of aging and care. As a former guest, I can tell you that Nicole's podcast has an ideal mix of practical tools and resources and messages of hope and encouragement. You can find Nicole wherever you download your favorite podcast or go to her website, willgather.com. Thanks for joining us today on the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast on the Whole Care Network. As always, show notes that accompany today's episode can be found on my website, happyhealthycaregiver.com. Just look under the podcast menu for today's episode image, and that will take you to the page with the links and information we spoke about today. You'll also find other resources on the website, along with links to purchase the Just For You Daily Self-Care Journal. When you purchase from my website, you'll get a signed copy and for a limited time, free shipping. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, consider subscribing to the show on your podcast platform. It really helps other family caregivers find the podcast, and you'll automatically receive our bi-weekly shows in your podcast listening queue. Maybe while you're subscribing, consider leaving a 5-star rating and review, or just simply talk it up on your social channels. Let's stay connected. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Happy Healthy Caregiver. And until we meet again, please take care of you.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.